Amara lived a solitary life in the quiet village of Alara, nestled at the foot of the Jade Mountains. Her home, a small cottage with a garden bursting with wildflowers, was her sanctuary. The villagers, however, saw her differently. A young widow, she was often the subject of hushed whispers and pitying glances. They saw her loneliness, but they didn't see the strength she had built within herself. One stormy night, as the rain lashed against her windowpanes, Amara heard a faint cry. She opened her door to find a woven basket, a tiny infant nestled inside, and a small, silver locket resting on his chest. He was abandoned, a mystery left on her doorstep. Amara didn't hesitate. Where the world saw a burden, she saw a son. She named him Kalen. She didn't have much, just a roof, food, and an abundance of love, but it was enough. For 12 years, they lived with the whispers of the villagers as a constant hum in the background. The other mothers would pull their children away, their gestures like shooing a stray dog. "Don't mix with him," they'd say, a quick wave of the hand. Amara pretended not to hear, but her heart ached every time she saw Kalen standing alone, his eyes following the other children's games. He was still so little, and she hoped he didn't understand the rejection, but she knew the body often feels what the heart can't explain. The unspoken pain of prejudice. The stories about Kalen spread like wildfire. People said he had no father, no family history. That a child like that brought bad luck. Some even whispered that a boy found at dawn with a silver locket could only be tied to a curse. The cruelest part was that these words always reached Amara's ears in the quietest moments of the day, when she was washing clothes by the creek or sweeping her small yard. In those moments, loneliness screamed the loudest. She could have tried to defend herself or made up a story, but instead, she stayed silent. That stubborn silence that protects what is most precious. She defended him with care, not words. She'd serve him more rice on his plate, more pieces of chicken when they had some, and more time on her lap when the day was long. Her love didn't need justification, and maybe that was exactly why it was so hard for others to accept. One afternoon, when she was at the village market, the conversation stopped for a moment when she walked in, then resumed in a low murmur. Maybe she's raising him to get something in return. Her hands tightened around her woven bag until her knuckles turned white. When she returned home, she found Kalen sitting on the floor, playing with a carved wooden toy. He smiled when he saw her, and that smile wiped away the bitter taste of the words still burning inside her. Amara knew that part of the prejudice wasn't just about Kalen, it was about her, too. A widowed woman, alone, who chose to love without the world's permission, in the village's imagination, that was suspicious. After all, who gives without getting anything in return? Who plants without knowing if they will ever harvest? But she, who had already felt the weight of being invisible, knew that the value of things isn't in what you get back, but in the silence you endure. She kept each of the villagers' looks like someone keeps scars, not to relive the pain, but to remember that she had stayed standing. The test of a mother's love. One day, when Kalen was 3, he was struck by a burning fever. His whole body burned, his eyes glazed with heat, and his sleep was heavy and broken by shivers. Amara, used to dealing with mild colds with teas and prayers, knew this was different. She took his small, weak hand and felt the burning heat against her palm. There was no one to run to, no family to knock on the door, so she slipped on her worn sandals and left. It was late afternoon, and the sky was already heavy with storm clouds. She went first to the home of one of the older women in the village, a former midwife. The woman's gaze was cold. "Is he your son?" she asked. When she heard, "Not by blood, but I raise him," the woman's face hardened, and she said she had nothing to give. Amara went on to another house, asking for help, but all she received was a dismissive gesture and the same sentence repeated like a curse: "He's not your son, not your problem." Each refusal weighed on her shoulders like a wet stone. Back at home, she found Kalen delirious. She sat beside him and placed a damp cloth on his forehead. With no medicine or help, Amara improvised. She prayed, whispered stories, and sang old lullabies, as if her voice alone could tether the boy to the world of the living. For 3 nights, she didn't sleep, her body exhausted, but her eyes wouldn't close. Finally, on the 3rd night, the fever broke. Kalen's breathing became calmer, and his face less flushed. She leaned her forehead against his, feeling the relief spread through her like the warmth of a campfire. The next morning, she opened the door to the timid sun returning after the rain. As she watched him eat slowly, holding the spoon clumsily, she knew all the exhaustion had been worth it. The world might not consider that boy hers, but Amara knew she had fought the fever the way only a mother would. A name spoken from the heart. A few months later, on a lazy afternoon, Kalen was running around the yard, his laughter light and carefree. He tripped over a rock and fell, scraping his knees on the rough ground. The crying came quickly, and in the middle of those sobs, a word escaped, "Mom, help me." The needle stopped mid-air in Amara's hand. It was the first time she had heard that word, and it didn't come out as a game or an imitation, it came loaded with need and absolute trust. She walked over, knelt down, and saw the thin blood trickling down his knee. She didn't respond right away. She simply picked him up gently and carried him inside. At the stove, she warmed some water, cleaned the wound slowly, and then wrapped it with a clean cloth. Inside her, Amara's heart danced to a rhythm it hadn't known in years. That word, so short and yet so huge, had pierced through time and absence. It was as if the boy had unknowingly opened a door she thought was locked forever. No one in the village needed to know, life had already taught her that the most sacred words are best kept secret because the world tends to ruin what it doesn't understand. She went on with her day as usual, but every time her eyes landed on Kalen, a quiet flame lit in her chest. That night, she kept replaying the sound of the word "Mom" coming from his mouth, repeating it in her mind. For Amara, that was a silent vow, that in moments of pain and fear, it would be her he called. And even if no one in the village had heard it, she knew that one word, spoken only once, had already grown roots strong enough to last a lifetime. A challenge, a choice, a father. Time moved forward, and Kalen was no longer the boy with scraped knees. At 12 years old, he was growing fast, his gaze steady, like someone who already knew the weight of the world. One late afternoon, a polished, horse-drawn carriage rolled into the village. A man in fine clothes, Cyrus, stepped down, adjusting his hat and coat. His walk was confident, his gaze alert like someone searching for something they weren't sure they wanted to find. The village, curious as ever, paused to watch. Cyrus passed by the well where Kalen was helping fill buckets. When their eyes met, something strange happened. The stranger stopped. He stared at the boy as if the world around him had vanished. For a moment, it seemed he was about to say something, but he swallowed the words. That night, Amara was preparing dinner when they heard a firm knock. She opened the door and came face to face with Cyrus. After a silence that felt too long, he asked about the boy. "I saw that boy today, and I need to know," he said, "how did he end up here?" Amara looked at him, weighing his intentions. But the tremble in his voice, the way his hands fidgeted on the table, told her this was not an ordinary conversation. Cyrus continued, "He has a way about him, a look in his eyes, just like someone I once knew. Someone I left behind." His eyes, now filled with tears, made it clear the story he carried wasn't light. The next day, Cyrus returned, and this time he went straight to the point. He sat at the table, placed both hands flat on the wooden surface, and let the words fall without ceremony. "That boy, he's my son." He explained that he had abandoned the baby out of fear and cowardice. He was from a wealthy, influential family and had left the child with his mistress to avoid scandal. He had tried for years to forget but never could. When he saw Kalen at the well, he immediately recognized what he had tried to bury in his memory. "I want to take the boy with me," he said. "To give him a better life." "He has a life here," Amara finally said, her voice low but steady. It was at that moment that Kalen walked into the kitchen. Cyrus stood, then knelt before him. "It's me," he said, eyes filled with tears. "I'm your father." The boy, confused, looked to Amara, searching for an anchor. She didn't say a word, just held his gaze the same way she always did. Then Kalen spoke without hesitation. "My mother is the one who taught me how to pray." There was no shouting, no crying, just a simple, pure, and final statement. Cyrus seemed to shrink in front of those words, as if realizing all at once that blood alone was not enough to earn the right to be called father. He stood, thanked Amara for the care she had given the boy, and left. The unwavering bond. The days that followed were a quiet storm. Kalen seemed more pensive, watching Amara as she swept or cooked. Edward didn't return right away, but his presence lingered like a shadow. Then, one late afternoon, he came back. "I'm not here to tear Kalen away by force," he said, his voice softer. "I only want to offer him the chance to live in the city, to attend the best schools, to have a better future." The words hung in the air like smoke. Amara knew exactly what he meant: new clothes, a brick house, full plates. But she also knew what that would cost. "If you want to go, go with my blessing," she said to Kalen. "But know who stayed by your side through the fevers, the pain, and the days when no one else wanted you." The boy raised his eyes to her, and the weight of the choice seemed to dissolve. He stood, walked over to Amara, and took her hand. "I'm staying," he said. "Nothing else." He didn't need to. Cyrus took a deep breath, as if struck by a silent blow. He had expected an easy decision. Who would turn down a comfortable life? But he was faced with a wall he didn't know how to climb, the wall of love that stays. He stood in silence for a while, looking at the two of them as if trying to imprint the image into his memory. He didn't argue or press the issue further. "I will return," he said, and walked back down the path. That night, mother and son had dinner together like always. They didn't mention what had happened, they didn't need to. They both knew the choice had not been just about where to live, but about who to stay with. And even if life would bring more trials ahead, in that moment, the bond between them had deepened. The silence that lingered after Kalen's refusal felt like it had sliced the air in two. For several days, Cyrus didn't show up. Ruth knew it wasn't the end. A man used to getting whatever he wanted with money wouldn't accept a no from a boy so easily. So, when he came back, it wasn't a surprise. He arrived standing tall, more confident, like someone who had come with a plan. He pulled an envelope from his pocket and placed it on the table. Inside was money, far more than Amara had ever held in her hands. "You could live better," he said plainly. "All I ask is that you let me take the boy." Amara looked at the envelope, then at him, and finally toward the doorway, where sunlight poured in. "We grow our food," she said, her voice firm. "Love can't be bought." She pushed the envelope back toward him and went on sweeping as if the conversation was over. Cyrus stood there, unsure how to react. He wasn't used to people turning down money. Without another word, he picked up the envelope and left. But he didn't stay gone. A week later, he returned. His posture had changed. There was no longer arrogance in his stride. He was dressed in simple clothes, and he seemed lighter, or maybe just more tired. He asked to come in, and this time, his voice didn't sound like a command. It sounded like a request. He confessed that after he left, he realized that despite the big house and the plentiful table, there was a kind of emptiness no wealth could fill. He said he wasn't there to take the boy anymore. He wanted to find a way to be part of his life, to give back, to show gratitude for all the years Amara had raised him alone. And in that moment, Amara realized that maybe life was finally beginning to work in their favor. The father, who once came as a threat, now seemed like someone willing to learn. The one who had only offered money and influence was now offering something else entirely. The unspoken bond. After that conversation, Cyrus started to notice subtle changes in his own life. He no longer came to talk about taking Kaylin away. He came to sit on the porch, to listen to the boys' stories, to leave behind a sack of flour or beans, not as payment, but as a genuine gesture. He seemed to be searching for a way to connect, to rebuild a bridge he had burned so long ago. It was one late afternoon, with heavy clouds piling up on the horizon, that Cyrus arrived with a different air about him. There was no envelope full of money in his hands, no expensive gifts. He came only with a hat on his head and a steady, calm gaze. He sat at the table, and before even taking a sip of the coffee Amara had served him, he shared the news. "I want to donate a piece of my land to the village," he said. "I want them to build a school, a good one, with more classrooms, more books, and more teachers. And I want it to bear your name." Amara's eyes widened, not out of vanity, but because it all seemed too big to fit into her story. Cyrus continued, his voice softer than ever. "You taught me that some things are worth more than money. I want to honor that. And I want the children of this village to have the future I couldn't give my own son." He looked at Kaylin, who was sitting in a corner, drawing with a piece of charcoal. There was a quiet understanding in his eyes. He wasn't there to take Kaylin away, he was there to earn his place in their lives, not as a father by blood, but as a man who finally understood the true meaning of family. And in that moment, Amara knew that their story was far from over. It was only just beginning, not with a conflict, but with a quiet understanding, a bond forged not by blood, but by destiny.